Wow, finally the leaves are out on the trees. There are actually more leaves on the trees the further south you go on I-65, so I hope that you are taking the time to get out and enjoy every possible moment of good weather that we have. I was counting the months, and all too soon it will be September. You know what happens, but I'm not going to think about that. You should just get out and enjoy this wonderful weather. I have, in my life, been a member of many, many organizations, from church to Sunday school to the Girl Scouts, Y Teens, Junior Achievement. I actually had dinner with a good friend of mine this week who was in town, and we participated in Junior Achievement in different cities, but we met each other in high school at the National Junior Achievement Conference. And we were remarking about how no one really hears about Junior Achievement anymore, and that's largely because the nature of the organization has changed. The organization went from being a place where high school students got together in the evening with corporate sponsors, and when I was in high school, you actually made products. Some of you may remember hearing about Junior Achievement companies, and they had different products that they sold, but the real benefit of that program was being in fellowship with other young people. You had leadership responsibilities. There were presidents and treasurers and VP of Finance and VP of Manufacturing. You made things. You had to pay attention to quality control. You had to figure out how to correct your fellow students who may not be cutting that piece of plexiglass just right on the saw, or putting things into a kiln, or encouraging people to go out and sell shares of stock and to go out and sell products, learning how to lead others. The program is now basically an economics education program that's taught in schools with the help of computer simulation. And we were just talking about the fact that the opportunity to be in relationship with people, to be in connection with people, to learn the dynamics of human interaction at a young age, to learn what it means to lead, to be and share common goals, to inspire one another, to do bigger and better things, is something that we learned very early on from not only Junior Achievement, but many other organizations. Community is an interesting thing. If I were to give a definition of community, it would be this. Communities are groups who share something in common that makes them somewhat distinct from the wider society. Groups who share something in common, but are yet distinct in some way from the wider society. Well, many kinds of communities you've been a part of. I know there are people here who are members of sororities and fraternities, various clubs. Our own Sandy Allen just stepped down from the Darien Women's Club, for which she's very grateful. It's in her post on Facebook. I can't name all of the groups and clubs that I've been a part of. The Corollaires are traveling. Some of you work with various ministries. In fact, we want to be sure that we capture your charitable organization so that we can kind of brag about you on our website to let people know that this is a community that cares about far more than just our local church. We care about our community in lots of different ways. There are lots of obligations that come with belonging to communities. Dues comes to mind. Most community organizations, you can't be a member unless you pay dues. Sororities or fraternities, you pledge. Danielle has told me fun stories about her sorority days at Lynchburg College. Walter pledged Alpha Phi Alpha during his senior year at Northwestern while he was doing his student teaching. I'm not so sure how bright that was, but he nonetheless managed to make it through. One of the more interesting stories was that they were sort of blindfolded and led into some place in the woods and told they had to find their way back without much help. These days, I think they call that hazing, maybe? And their chapter might be in big trouble. Nonetheless, the group of Alpha Phi Alpha from the Alpha Mu chapter surrounded me at our wedding and sang their wonderful hymn, a bit off-key, but they sang it. But communities and organizations all have cultures. It's important that you learn the ways, the rules, the how-tos, the whys, the wherefores. In some organizations, you're required to sponsor certain events. I've been invited several times to be a member of Jack and Jill, which is a social and academic for African Americans. It was developed in the days when our society was much more segregated than it is now, and I have always resisted because I think the organization is a bit too exclusive, but part of the requirements is that you have to host so many events for the family and pay so much money. It's a little too bougie for my blood, if you know what I mean. My father never wanted us to be a part of it, and I decided that my son and I would not be a part of it either. Well, ancient Christianity, we've heard lots of stories about these wonderful people that we look up to and admire so much, and we always say, wow, if we could get back to the way those early Christians lived their lives. I want to think about this morning a little bit about both the good, bad, the ugly, of what it really meant to be one of those early Christians and what kind of community we might consider ourselves to be and what kind of community we desire to be. Ancient Christianity was, like most clubs, most organizations, most communities, a voluntary thing. Do they meet this definition of a group who have a lot in common, who are yet distinct in some way from their society? Yeah, they sure do. But they also faced a lot of persecution. They met together for sure, but they often met together in homes and were secret about what they were doing in one aspect. They faced a lot of persecution. Many of them were still Jewish, and so the text reminds us that they met day by day in the temple. They still carried out their Jewish worship practices. They met together in homes to have meals, and as part of that meal, as we learned during our Agape Feast at Maundy Thursday time, the elements of what we now know as communion were incorporated, and eventually the idea of sharing a meal in that way went away, and we have the ritual that we now celebrate during our worship service. Nothing was really mandated in an aggressive kind of way. They were concerned about how their message was perceived, and no one wanted to bring shame or disgrace to the cause of Christ. One of the things that we often look at in this text today is the fact that they had all things in common, and they sold their goods, and if anybody needed anything, they were sure to be sharing what they had. In our capitalistic, individualistic society, the idea of all of us selling what we have and being sure that everyone has what they need is just a little foreign to us. And we find it hard to imagine how it could be that a group would care so much for one another that if I have too much or more than I need, I'm going to share it with someone who doesn't have enough. This example of Christ, of unconditional love and belonging, the stories that Jesus often told, especially with the rich young ruler, who would ask what he needed to do to enter into the kingdom, was to sell all that he had and give it to the poor. He walked away with his head down. He just couldn't meet that particular bar. What matters as part of communities? How do we distinguish ourselves from the wider society? There are dangerous aspects to being a community. Any community that doesn't recognize that it is part of a wider society risks being exclusionary, and it risks being irrelevant. I hate to remind you, but Jim Jones, of the infamous Jonestown incident, you know, the people who drank the Kool-Aid laced with cyanides, he was a disciples minister. And people have used this example to say, that's why you should never have a pastor who has too much authority. Well, the problem was not only that, but the problem was that Jim Jones taught that this community needed to just be a part of itself. There was no recognition of doing work or mission apart from the wider, or in conjunction with the wider society. There was no notion that anyone mattered except this community. And anytime you see groups or individuals who try to cut you off from the wider society in which you live, I would raise a red flag. That's where we get cults. That's where we get abusive relationships. So when we say that we have something in common and that we are distinct from society, it doesn't mean that we are apart from society. How can we be distinct? How were the ancient Christians actually distinct? We actually have some wonderful historians who've written some wonderful newsletters, if you will, about what they knew about these ancient communities. I want to share something written to you, and those of you who were in Bible study, when we were doing our History of Christianity session, you may remember some of these names, hopefully. The early philosopher Justin the Martyr, wrote to the Roman Emperor Antonius Pius. And in this particular excerpt, we see that they're inviting people to judge them and be very scrutinous of their lives. They are putting themselves forward as a group of people who are not ashamed of who they are. He says, "We have not come to flatter you by writing this, nor please you by our address, but we beg that you pass judgment upon us after an accurate and searching investigation. As for us, no evil can be done to us unless we are convicted as evildoers or proved to be wicked men. You can kill us, but you cannot hurt us. To avoid anyone thinking that this is an unreasonable and reckless declaration, we demand that the charges against the Christians be investigated. It is our task, therefore, to provide to all an opportunity to inspect our life and teachings. It is your business when you hear us to be good judges, as reason demands. If, when you have learned the truth, you do not do what is just, you will be without excuse before God. So persecute us if you will, but look at us and see if what we are doing is not right and just. We believe," they say, "that what we are doing is right. Look at us good and hard. We think we can withstand the scrutiny." And then there is an epistle written to Diogenes in AD 130 that sees a wonderful description of what was expected in this early community. It talks about these Christians, that they follow the customs of the natives in the countries in which they live in respect to food, clothing, and the rest of their conduct. They display to us their wonderful and confessedly striking method of life. They dwell in their own countries, but simply as sojourners. As citizens, they share in all things with others, and yet endure all things as if foreigners. Every foreign land is to them their own country, and every land of their birth as a land of strangers. They marry as do all others. They beget children, but they do not destroy their offspring. Many religious institutions in the ancient world had child sacrifice as an important aspect of their culture. They have a common table, but not a common bed. They are in the flesh, but they do not live after the flesh. They pass their days on earth, but they are citizens of heaven. They are unknown and condemned. They are put to death and are restored to life. They are poor, yet make many rich. They are in lack of all things, and yet abound in all. They are dishonored, and yet in their very dishonor they are glorified. They are evil spoken of, and yet are justified. They are reviled and blessed. They are insulted, and repay the insult with honor. They do good, and yet they are punished as evildoers. When punished, they rejoice as if quickened into life. They are assailed by the Jews as foreigners, and are persecuted by the Greeks. Yet those who hate them are unable to assign any reason for their hatred. To sum it all up in one word, what the soul is to the body, that are Christians to the world. What the soul is to the body, they are Christians in the world. This comes from people who did not share their belief, who did not know or understand why they were doing what they were doing, but the witness of that community, sharing in common a faith in Jesus Christ, and yet being distinct but not totally separate from their society. People knew that they stood for something. They couldn't understand why they were so selfless, but they had an impact so much that scholars and historians wrote about these interesting and wonderful people who were as the soul is to the body. That is what Christians are in the world. And finally, the apology of Tertullian, who says, "It is mainly the deeds of a love so noble that lead many to put a brand upon us Christians. See, they say, how they love one another, for they themselves are animated with mutual hatred. See, they say about us, how they are ready even to die for one another, for they themselves would sooner kill." He goes on to talk about how the elders have a guide over the congregation, that people give when they're asked to give. No one is compelled to give. It's all voluntary. They do not spend their money on feasts or drinking bouts or eating houses, but they spend their money to support poor people, to supply the wants of boys and girls destitute of means and parents, and for old people confined now to their houses. If there happen to be any in the mines or banished to the islands or shut up in prisons, they become the nurslings of their confessions. See how they love one another. That's the testimony of this community that is distinct from society, but never separated from society. In 2007, a survey was given to ask what people are looking for in church. And one of the most important things was a clear and identified system of beliefs and theology, a sense of belonging, and a sense that the community lives up to what it says it believes. I think that's still true today. Gangs and other groups give people a sense of belonging, identification. The fact that people want so badly to belong lets us know what people will do to connect, to be a part of something that gives their life seemingly a greater meaning. The rise of conservative Christianity speaks to a need to belong and have some kind of standard that you live up for. And in the absence of water, people, one person once said, will drink the sand. So even if the theology isn't really healthy, people want so much to belong and have something to live up to that they will connect with something that simply compels them in any way possible. Tertullian says, see how they love one another? Can this be said of us if we were to leave a notebook after our 50th anniversary? Could it be said of us that the elders ruled over them with love and great care? Could it be said of us, see how they love one another? Could it be said of us that when we were able, we gave and we met the needs of those around us? Could it be said of us, see how they love one another? Max Lucado, who many of you may have read, is a wonderful devotional writer. If you've not read anything from Max, I would highly recommend him. He says that Christ distributes courage through community. He dissipates doubts through fellowship. He never deposits all the knowledge in one person, but he distributes it in pieces of the jigsaw puzzle to many. And when you interlock your understanding with mine, and we share our discoveries, when we mix, mingle, confess, and pray, Christ speaks. You need my gift, I need yours. I need your understanding, you need mine. We're all a part of God's body. It's His will that every need be supplied. We don't necessarily have to sell all that we have, but we should give as much as we can so that all needs might be met, both within this community and in the lives of the community around us. We are a community who has something very special that we believe, and it should make us distinct within the society that we serve, but it shouldn't make us separate. We shouldn't be a cult of crazy beliefs. We shouldn't be people who profess and do nothing to live out that confession. Christ gives us courage in community, Max Lucado says, and he dissipates our doubts through fellowship. We need each other to survive 50 years strong and 50 years into the future. I hope that history will look back and say, that was a community who loved. That was a community who were committed to doing the work of God beyond their walls. That was a community who prayed, who shared. See how they loved one another. That's what I want them to say about us 50 years from now. I need you, you need me. We need each other to survive. Amen.